So, Lilo and Stitch is hands down one of the best Disney movies, and it's not even a question for me. I will acknowledge there is some bias there. This movie came out in 2002 when I was a toddler, and once it came out on DVD, I watched it over and over again. But while my nostalgia glasses might be on a little too tight, I can also see the mastery and the artistry in the original production. Yeah, it has some third act problems, and the sci-fi adventure bits are undeniably less interesting than the family drama, but all in all, it still holds up really well. Ultimately, my praise for Lilo and Stitch lies in its subtlety, which is something a lot of movies and a lot of stories in general simply cannot manage. Lilo and Stitch, as a movie, manages to say a lot without actually saying very much at all, which is such a complex skill to pin down. But don't just take it from me, listen to Disney animator Andreas Deja and his interview with Art Insights.
And I looked at her first at the first drawings that presenters had done, and I thought, oh, she's going to be a little squishy, squashy, Freddie Moore type character, which she wasn't. You know, she would be handled maybe that way because everything's very round, and broad and all that sometimes. But she was very subtle. She was probably the most subtle characters that I've done.
Yeah,
and she did a lot with little movement, with looks, with just small things.
Of course, the subtlety comes through in the writing too, not just in the animation. Take this scene, for example. Lilo has just shown her hula classmates her homemade doll named Scrump. They abandon her, she throws Scrump on the ground, then comes back to pick her up and hug her. This scene, to me, is the epitome of show don't tell. We get a feel for Lilo's emotions without her having to say a single word, and it's so much more effective that way. Why would she say what she's feeling here? It makes so much more sense to show it. This one beat tells us so much about Lilo as a character. Hell, this beat makes me feel more emotion than any live-action Disney production in their totality. Lilo is such a well-written child character. If you've ever tried to write children before, you know how difficult it is. We forget what being a child is like as we get older. But an action like this, doing something rash like throwing a doll on the ground only to be immediately remorseful and apologetic, that's just human. That's an ageless experience. Lilo's action here is paralleled multiple times over throughout the movie, this process of destruction, remorse, and reconciliation. In fact, that's one of the first things Lilo does in the movie. She lashes out at her hula classmate, Myrtle, feels remorse, and soon apologizes. We see that course of action in Nani and Stitch, too. For example, when Nani and Lilo get in their shouting match and Nani later comes to reconcile with a slice of pizza. Or when Stitch realizes he's ruined Nani's chances of keeping Lilo and tries to reconcile things by leaving. One of the movie's major themes is the idea that anyone can change, even a creature designed to destroy, so this repeated pattern only makes sense. As an aside, I'm reminded of Where the Wild Things Are. A parental figure bringing their loved one a meal after a dispute certainly sounds familiar. But let's take a short step back and talk about Lilo as a child again. Like I said, writing children is hard, but Lilo feels so believable and so complete. Part of that comes from the numerous quirks she has. She photographs strangers, gets into fights, bites, feeds a fish whom she believes controls the weather, attempts voodoo, has a strange fixation with Elvis Presley, and more. Lilo is weird and quirky in a way most Disney protagonists could only dream of being, as most 5-year-olds are, and that makes her real. In short, Lilo works so well because she's not a stereotype, and I don't just mean a Hawaiian stereotype, but a child stereotype. She's not dumb, she's not particularly innocent or bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. No, she's far more complex than that, and complexity is perhaps the most important thing when it comes to writing characters. Take it from Robert Boswell in his book, The Half-Known World. To call a character a type is to say that he's so true to a group of characters that he is indistinguishable from all the other in that group. Here's another definition of a stereotype: any character that is fully known. Fiction writers who attempt to deal with a stereotype by merely disrupting the character's adherence to type are like the playwright who puts a pond on stage. They are confusing their medium. The better method is to suggest the parts of the character that are, by most standards, invisible. In other words, assume that the attributes that make the character a type are merely the surface features. Another way to put it: write the character so that his actions and dialogue suggest that the reader can only ever half know him. In some ways, the original Lilo and Stitch does sort of disrupt Lilo's adherence to child stereotypes, but ultimately I think the movie gets away with it by simply making her complex. To quote Boswell one more time, "We're seduced in fiction when it shows us not how people are supposed to act, but how they really act." Lilo is not a perfect child, and Nani is not a perfect guardian. They express selfishness, meanness, and ugliness at times, but that's what makes them real. Another thing that makes these characters so real is their inability to express themselves. Remember how I said this movie says a lot without saying much at all? The same is true for the characters. In general, children aren't good at expressing themselves, and we see that in Lilo. There's this scene where Nani and Lilo are shouting at each other, and all Lilo can think to say is, "No, no, no." Is that not how a real child would communicate in that instance? Top-notch dialogue. Then there's this instance from Nani where Mr. Bubbles has decided Lilo needs to be taken away. Nani stammers and has no idea how to explain herself. In a much lesser script, Nani would know exactly what to say in this instance, but what real person would have the perfect words for a moment like this? It's only natural for her to stammer here and ultimately fail to come up with any words. The idea of expression culminates when Nani sings Aloha Oi to Lilo. There's an old rule in musical theater that when feelings are too strong to express through dialogue, you express them through song instead. Lilo and Stitch isn't a musical, but the rule still applies. Understandably, Nani wouldn't have the words to explain her and Lilo's position in this moment, so the song is perfectly poignant. It is perhaps the most beautiful scene in the movie. Stitch, of course, can't exactly express himself on a physical level, seeing as he struggles with language in a way the other characters don't, but what's more, he doesn't really want to express himself, he just wants to destroy. It's significant that the moment he first communicates the most is in this instance, after he's chosen to leave Lilo. Jumba confronts him, and Stitch says he's waiting for his family. Jumba tells him he doesn't have a family, and Stitch tries to communicate something, saying, "Maybe I could," but ultimately doesn't have the words. Again, we see one of our main characters with the inability to find the right words. Stitch wants a family, he wants to belong, but he's unable to completely express that. Granted, Jumba isn't helping as he interrupts his thoughts by saying, "You're built to destroy. You can never belong," which naturally brings us into the film's most significant big ideas, family and belonging. Lilo and Stitch are very clearly foils to each other. Stitch wants to be an abomination while Lilo wants to be good. Stitch wants to destroy while Lilo wants to mend. Why do you think she named him Stitch in the first place? And of course, both of them grapple with the issue of belonging. Lilo feels extreme kinship with Stitch because he's an orphan. She literally says just as much. When Jumba tells Stitch that he can never belong, there's no doubt that Lilo feels similarly. Her parents are gone, her peers routinely abandon her, and she often gets in fights with her sister. She might feel like a destroyer in the same way that Stitch does. As an aside, one thing to point out is that various English translations of the Hawaiian word Lilo come out as give up or to be lost. The first time that Stitch considers something more than destruction is, notably, when he first interacts with fiction. Lilo briefly tells him the story of the ugly duckling. In her words, "That's the ugly duckling. See? He's sad because he's all alone and nobody wants him. But on this page, his family hears him crying and they find him. Then the ugly duckling is happy because he knows where he belongs." Stitch is so taken with this story that he later brings the book along with him when he leaves Lilo. He tries to live out the story as it's written and waits for his family to come find him. As another aside, that's often a pattern among fictional monsters, their first interactions with fiction and how significant those moments are. But anyhow, Stitch of course realizes that his family already found him. I know I said that the beauty of Lilo and Stitch was in its subtlety, but when it comes to messaging, it admittedly doesn't get clearer than this. If you've seen the movie, you know the moral. Ohana means family, and family means nobody gets left behind, or forgotten. A lot has been said about Lilo's tendency to take pictures of other people. We could read that as her turning tourists into attractions themselves, flipping the script on white folks who would see her more as a feature of Hawaii than as a human being. There certainly is something to be said about tourism and the commodification of Hawaiian culture. We see later in the movie how Stitch is turned into an attraction for a moment, and how distressed that makes Lilo. I'm not trying to discredit that reading at all, but I will add in addition that I think there's more to the pictures. Lilo says just as much when Stitch chooses to go. She says, "Ohana means family. Family means nobody gets left behind. But if you want to leave, you can. I'll remember you though. I remember everyone that leaves." Lilo is very concerned with the idea of people leaving, seeing as her parents, well, left the world of the living. The photograph of her parents is her most prized possession. Lilo will let Stitch touch anything except for that picture, and when Lilo draws a line there, Stitch actually listens. For Lilo, photos are a means of remembrance, and remembrance is extremely important to her because she knows how easily someone can go. To her, family is literally synonymous with remembrance. Family means nobody gets left behind, or forgotten. Lilo and Stitch 2025, on the other hand, is perhaps one of the most frustrating exercises in overtness I've ever seen. I have a lot of thoughts about this movie, and they're probably going to come off as scattered, so bear with me. Alright, I am about to go see the Lilo and Stitch remake. I am not enthused. I watched the original just 2 days ago, and I just know this one's gonna be worse, so yeah, here we go. Well, I just finished watching Lilo and Stitch, the remake, and on my way out of the theater, I also got a flat tire. So, yeah, you could say not the best movie experience I've ever had. So, you know how I said the intergalactic scenes were the least interesting part of the original movie? Well, geez, at least they were fun in 2D. They feel so void of vitality in the CG live-action style. Also, the way to improve these scenes wasn't just to rush through them. The beginning feels so wildly truncated, and the third act's action scenes feel similar. But okay, that's not actually what we're here to talk about. We're talking about the lack of subtlety in the remake, and there are a lot of ways this comes up. For one thing, Lilo kind of feels like a caricature of herself in this movie, and let me quickly add, I mean no shade to Maya Kealoha. She was probably my favorite part of this movie. My issue is purely with the writing. Remember how I said earlier that it's hard to write a child character? A lot of times Lilo's dialogue doesn't feel real. It feels like an adult trying to write a child. A good example would be her first interaction with Cobra Bubbles. In the original movie, the way they interact makes sense. Lilo acts like a real 5-year-old, her curiosity getting the better of her, dropping observations and questions that aren't exactly appropriate. In the remake, Lilo literally says that she reads Cobra Bubbles like a book. And don't get me wrong, Lilo is clearly smart for her age, but she's still a child. Even setting the interaction itself aside, the dialogue is just too on the nose, which is a fairly common occurrence for Lilo in this movie. Or take a look at the record player scene. Again, it's the subtleness here that makes this work. The whole premise of the scene is, by nature, ridiculous, and so it's Nani's understated reaction that really drives the humor home. She doesn't scream, she doesn't say a single word, but look at her facial expressions. It's just perfect. How does the remake handle this scene? Nani doesn't even notice it, and Lilo overreacts to it, so it's like, what's even the point? There are so many moments in this movie where the subtlety from the original is just dropped, so I'm just going to rattle off a bunch of them. Lilo's hula instructor very heavy-handedly points out how weird it is for Lilo to feed a fish who she thinks controls the weather. Like, the dialogue is about as overt as possible. Like, you think a fish controls the weather? It really is the Marvelification of script writing, where characters have to practically turn to the camera and say how absurd something is, but more on that later. David is way more awkward in this movie in a way that isn't very charming or funny. When David strikes out with Nani in the original, his awkwardness is very understated and cute. Here, the remake just hits you over the head with it. It's that same quirky, fumbling awkwardness that we've seen in so many Disney characters before. The moment when Stitch comes up with his plan to use Lilo as a human shield, the revelation is treated with heavy lighting and music as if a vision from on high, which is so confusing for a remake. Like, I at least sort of get the intention in changing, say, the record player scene. Like, sure, why rehash the same bits? But here, we're not just rehashing the bit, we're also adding extra emphasis where none is needed. Why? There's also the moment where Lilo puts the lei around Stitch's neck. That moment in the original serves as a humorous little bit. It's an unexpected move from Lilo, and in turn it creates an unexpected reaction in Stitch. Like the record player scene, it's kind of an understated moment, a confusing one at that. But in the remake, its added emphasis just sort of heightens the confusion. Like, in both versions of the scene, there's not really any reason for the lei to calm Stitch down, but again, in the original, it's at the very least understated. There are also far more egregious instances of overtness. For example, the movie really smacks you in the face with the fact that Lilo and Nani's parents are dead. And dead parents are such a tired Disney trope at this point that the emphasis here hurts more than it helps. The emotional impact was stronger in the original because sometimes less really is more. Even the choices in editing and music just add a bunch of unnecessary weight. Where it was the most egregious, in my opinion, was when the social worker initially comes to Nani in Lilo's house. Things don't go well, just like in the original, and the movie lets you know that. I don't even remember whether the sequence had music or not in the original, which is ideal because you don't want the music overpowering the scene, you want it blending seamlessly. But let's talk about the movie's biggest misstep when it comes to subtlety, and that's in theming. You know how I said the least subtle part about the original Lilo and Stitch was its messaging? Nowhere is it less subtle than here when Nani and Lilo spell out that Ohana means family and family means nobody gets left behind or forgotten. This scene is very intentionally heavy-handed. Look at the effect it's having on Stitch. That's the same effect that it's supposed to be having on us, the audience. In the remake, this scene, the one scene where they had permission to be as unsubtle as they could possibly be, this scene is turned into a joke. All of the emotion is completely sucked out in favor of Stitch hitting Nani in the face with the refrigerator door. It's an absolutely baffling decision because this scene does so much for Stitch in the original. In fact, pretty much all of Stitch's character turning points are done away with in the remake, including his interaction with literature, which makes his choice to leave a lot less sensical and compelling. And that's where Jumba comes in. Okay, let's quickly address the giant whalish alien in the room. If you weren't aware already, this movie eliminated the role of Gantu and opted to make Jumba the primary antagonist instead. Now, listen. Don't hate me for saying this, but on paper, I don't think that's actually a terrible idea. Gantu is an okay villain in so much as he provides a threatening presence and a physical opposition to our main characters, but the true ideological antagonist towards Stitch is Jumba. However, if Disney really wanted Jumba to be the true antagonist of this film, well, they misstepped in far too many places. Look, I like Zach Galifianakis, I really do, but he was just flat out the wrong choice for Jumba. Like, even on the vocal level, Zach just wasn't it. You've probably seen this before, these two shapes. One of them is called Kiki, and the other is called Booba. Without any other context, you know which one is called which, right? In that same vein, when you see this character and find out his name is Jumba, you already have a concept in your mind of what he should sound like, right? But I digress. Jumba does serve as the ideological opposite to Stitch in the remake, but he's never a real threat. The reason Jumba wasn't the primary antagonist in the original is because the movie clearly wanted to make him a little bumbling and redeemable. How do you expect a villain to be taken seriously as a threat when they're always the butt of the joke? As such, Gantu's presence in the original makes sense as the real threat. The script clearly takes him seriously. If the remake wanted Jumba to be the primary villain, he couldn't also fill the comedic relief role. Am I supposed to like him or not? And what's worse, while he may be the ideological opponent, his ideology is so ham-fisted. He goes on this strange, unwarranted monologue about how humanity's weakness is in its attachment to things. It feels like it comes out of nowhere, especially since he's not really talking to anyone in particular. Like, I thought we were done with these stupid monologues after The Incredibles pointed out how silly they are. Okay, if I haven't made my point by now, I don't think I ever will, but there is still one more thing I want to discuss, and that's Nani. Lilo and Stitch is one of the realest Disney movies, despite its sci-fi premise. It's surprisingly heavy for a kids movie, and Nani as a character helps drive that home. And let me note, Tia Carrere's voice role as Nani should be just as applauded as Davy Chase's performance as Lilo. But the remake makes a lot of strange changes with Nani. For one thing, the movie removes Nani entirely from the adoption scene, which is just utterly baffling. Like, sure, on a financial level, it doesn't make much sense for Nani to want an animal in the house while she and Lilo are already struggling, but characters should be pushing the plot forward, not the other way around. Removing Nani's agency and turning Lilo's acquisition of Stitch into pure chance is just a crazy decision, in my opinion. It also makes Nani's choice to listen in on Lilo's wish totally pointless. It was that wish that moved Nani to go to the adoption center in the first place. But beyond that, there's a new subplot where Nani wants to go to college in San Diego to become a marine biologist, but she can't because she now has the responsibility of raising Lilo. Of course, by the end of the movie, everything just works out for her. David's mom, who's a character in this movie by the way, works it out with the social worker so that she can take Lilo in while Nani goes to school. This is, I suppose, heartwarming, but it just feels too convenient and way less real than the original. In the 2002 movie, it's subtly implied that Nani was a competitive surfer before her parents died, perhaps even with the potential to go pro, but she puts that all behind her so she can take care of Lilo. That character detail reinforces the message of the story. Nani was going to be certain that Lilo was never left behind or forgotten. But in the remake, the fact that Nani gets to go to school, well, it kind of cheapens the moral, doesn't it? The original Lilo and Stitch tells us that family is the most important thing in the world, sometimes the only thing we have in this world, and that's the choice we have to make. But here, Nani is saved from having to make any tough decisions. You know, the way characters do. Listen, I'm not part of the go woke, go broke crowd, that's just stupid. But at the same time, it feels like Disney is genuinely afraid of doing anything that might seem even slightly politically incorrect. This change in Nani's character feels like, I guess, a means to show that women have agency, while the movie ironically takes away some of the most important choices that Nani makes. There's the choice to raise Lilo, the choice to adopt a dog, but in the original, Nani also makes the choice to go surfing even when it's a bad time for her to do so. In the remake, the surfing scene comes as a result of Nani applying for a surf instructor job. This choice, funnily enough, actually takes away a lot of the context that made the original surfing scene so interesting. And earlier in the movie, they removed a lot of the toxicity between Lilo and Nani. I'm not saying they were ever necessarily toxic, but they lost their temper with each other and said harsh things, you know, the way real sisters do. In the remake, the joke about Nani disciplining Lilo is gone. The suggestion that Nani sell Lilo and buy a rabbit is gone. These things that felt real and raw and emotional have just been stripped away, and in their place, Disney is too afraid to really say anything. Remember how I talked earlier about the Marvelification of script writing? This is it. Disney has become far too comfortable with bathos, the anticlimax created in going from sincerity to humor. Being sincere isn't cool anymore, everything has to be ironic. And while there is some sincerity toward the end of this movie, it feels like too little too late. Plus, the movie tries to do a fake-out death with Stitch, but obviously there's no tension there because of course Stitch isn't going to die. There is so much more to say about this movie. I didn't even touch on the characters they added that will inevitably be forgotten, like the many other live-action characters injected into the previous cash grabs, or how they turned the serious, caring, sympathetic, and subtly comedic Cobra Bubbles into a nothing-burger government agent. No shade to Courtney B. Vance, though. I don't mean to knock anyone's performance. I'm sure they're all doing their best. Let's just leave it there for now. What do you think? Did you see the remake? What are your thoughts on it? What do you think of my reflections here? Please tell me everything. And hey, if you liked this video, please do all the things the algorithm likes, and consider following me on my socials and joining my Patreon. You're seeing the names of my patrons scrolling on screen right now, and I genuinely can't thank them enough. And thank you for watching, and ultimately, keep in mind, this is a rough draft. Also, they put Uptown Funk into this movie. An Uptown Funk jump scare in 2025, ladies and gentlemen. Can we please stop doing that? It was jarring enough when it showed up in Sonic 2, but here? I guess nothing screams timeless like Uptown Funk, am I right?